I don't even know where to start. Off the wall is kind of the thing I'm thinking about the most right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a stupid thing. It's like a really dumb thing, but like, I realized that no one wants to live with a sculpture in their house. Not even me. Like, all the sculpture I have in my house is on a shelf. And so like, I started to think, I'm making these things that I'm interested in, but do I want to live with them? And what would I make that would be something that I would want to live with? And I think that like grad school teaches you how to like kind of be ambitious and challenge what's going on in the art world. But at some point you have to start saying like, I want my work to exist outside of the pile of stuff in the corner of my studio. And I want people to actually see it and be with it. And so I'm interested in the fact that like, what can you do coming off the wall? What kind of relationship to the architecture can you have and still make a relevant, interesting 3D form? And I think that there is a big shift in my work right now as far as like content. But I also think that it's going back to kind of my beginnings. You know, I think that if you really look at some of the very, very earliest forms that I ever made, there's a lot of similarity to what I'm doing now. Why sculpture? Like, why contend with this stuff? And I think that the reality is that sculpture is the one medium that actually contends with reality the most. So is it freezing cold in the room? Is it, you know, are there lights in the room? Like all that stuff matters to the actual form itself. And to me, that's the appealing challenge, exactly as you've described. Like, the challenges arise, the questions arise, how do you contend with them? And 100% of what I do is, I want this form and I want it to exist here in space. How do I get it from the floor to there? How do I get it from the wall to there? But I think more relevant to these new pieces is actually Brancusi. Like, I've always, not always, but as a young child going to the MoMA and riding up the escalator and seeing the very first thing is bird in space at the top of the escalator. I'm dating myself because that doesn't exist anymore, but that used to be how it worked. That was always this piece that I remembered as being iconic and confusing. I was like, I don't see the bird, I don't understand it, but I love it. The form is great. And I was a kid. But Brancusi always stood out to me, and the fact that like, I, as a young artist, ignored the pedestals, always ignored the pedestals, until I started to realize that the pedestals were maybe the sculpture themselves, or at least as valuable as the sculpture, or at least in the conversation. And so to me, it started to talk about how do you incorporate the display methodology on an equal footing as the object. Some of the original pieces were, I don't want to say bipolar because that's not the right word. I was doing two different things at the same time. And I had two tracks, and one of the pieces was, or series of pieces, was really about like the poetics of intimacy and sex and romance. And then the other was like a criticism of masculinity and sex. And I was making both those pieces or series of pieces at the same time. And I didn't know how to put them together. Things were like, I didn't know how to deal with the fact that like there was no place for me feeling like in society. And so I wanted to challenge that. And so they are a lot about sex because they're so neurotic. And so like all of the things that I'm talking about in my art are about my kind of neuroses and insecurities and idiosyncrasies, as I hope everybody is. But I think the shift that's now happening is that like the world went and caught up in a way that I never expected. You know, like the fact that we are talking about like sexuality as a spectrum on a regular basis, the fact that we are talking about like like no one would ever say you're the girl in the relationship. That would never happen now. And
Mm.
to me, it's like incredibly exciting, but it's also kind of bewildering because it's like, oh, all the content just got like ripped away from my work and kind of made silly at this point. And so
Mm.
I think that the content has definitely shifted now for my work, but it's still about my idiosyncrasies and my insecurities, and those still relate to my own sense of being sexually, intellectually, and beyond. What I try to teach my students and what I try to think about, which is like, whatever I'm doing, I want it to be an expression that only I would make. You know, I've seen lots of, you know, welded together wire things before and bent wood things before. I want to try to figure out how to do it myself. I've seen a lot of things about sex before. I've seen a lot of abstract art before. I want to try to make it something that could only be made by my weirdness. You know,
Mhm.
where's the weird thing that is Sanford and only Sanford would produce? That's my goal.